Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hey.
Oh, you make your fashion relate. You're available, so that's not your seat.
Thank you all for being here, taking another afternoon of your busy schedules. We'll get started. And we really appreciate your time the past 9 months attending this meeting, reviewing material, and providing your feedback. The purpose of today's meeting is to primarily provide an update on the items that we discussed at the May Local Advisory Group meeting. In a minute, I will request introductions. After that, I have a few slides to provide an overview and recap of various options that we discussed at the previous meeting. Followed by that, Secretary will provide this update. Then I'll have a few slides to provide some technical information, technical details of those options. And then Secretary will do closing. I'm Radhakrishna Swayampakala. I'm assisting Turnpike to give this presentation. And we'll do introductions. Start with Commissioner Puckett here.
Jim Puckett, Mecklenburg County Commissioner.
Pat Cotham, County Commissioner at Large.
Jeff McNeely, Iredell County Commissioner.
Carlene Iris, City of Charlotte.
Kurt Niles, Cornelius, Commissioner.
Jim Taylor with Mercator Advisors.
Jim Trogdon with North Carolina Department of Transportation.
Louis Mitchell, Chief Engineer's Office.
Bo Memory, the Turnpike Authority.
Mike Russell, Huntersville.
Brandon Trigo, Huntersville Chamber.
John Hetward, Lake Norman Chamber.
Lisa Qualls, Commissioner, Town of Mooresville.
Mark Brady, Mooresville, South Iredell Chamber.
Beth Cashin, former Commissioner of Town of Davidson.
Thank you. Then we have a few representatives from NCDOT and Turnpike.
Roger Rochelle, Turnpike Authority.
Nicole Meister, DOT.
Carly Alexic with NCDOT.
And then a couple of my co-workers with RS and H, Phil and Adam, that have been helping me with this. So just kind of want to, obviously you all are very familiar with the local advisory group. Just wanted to start with this slide. As you all very well know, local advisory group was started in December 2017 with 12 members. And the primary purpose of this group was to review options that were in the Mercator report and advise and provide input to NCDOT Secretary. And you all have attended the past 7 meetings. We had 7 so far, and today is the 8th meeting. And we covered a lot of topics in those meetings. We all started talking about the history, project overview, the background, and we reviewed the Mercator options. We spent a couple of meetings in depth discussing Mercator options so that we all have the same familiarity and understanding of those options. And then you all provided feedback, pros and cons on each of those options. And based on those discussions, especially at the April meeting and May meeting, you all provided feedback, adding a couple of more options for NCDOT's consideration. What you see on the slide are the original 10 options that were in the Mercator report. Not going to go through these options on this slide. In the next couple of slides, we'll be talking about some of these and also the additional options that were added based on your feedback. The table you see here is these are the options that are currently under evaluation. First, option C1, 2, C2, C3, and C5. These are the options that relate to modifications. Modifications in terms of changing the express lanes to general purpose lanes, or modifying to accommodate frequent user discount or toll credit, or modifying to allow medium trucks, or modifying to accommodate future projects, especially revenue impacting facilities. Option E refers to completing the project, completing the construction, open the facility, and NCDOT purchase the contract so that the state could maintain and operating the facility. F, often called as complete and delete or complete and modify, involves completing the construction, opening the project, and doing additional studies as needed to potentially convert all the express lanes into general purpose lanes. Like I mentioned, then we added options G, H, and I. Those are primarily based on the feedback that you all provided at the April and May meetings. G involves using shoulders, specifically outside shoulders, during peak periods to accommodate traffic. H, option H, involves adding another general purpose lane over the causeway, specifically exit 28 to exit 36. And then finally, I is combination of C1 and H, which is converting this middle section from exit 23 to 28, from 2 express lane to 1 express lane, and then adding the third general purpose lane on the causeway so that there will be 3 GP lanes and 1 express lane all the way from 23 to 36. This slide provides you the listing of options that are not being evaluated at this time. Again, this is primarily based on the feedback that we got from you all at the May meeting. Option A and B. A involves terminating the contract, stop construction, and NCDOT continue the construction, whereas B involves terminate the contract, stop construction, and then go back to CRTPO and redefine the project scope. C4 involves modifying the facility to allow HOT2+. And then finally, D allows or involves working with CRTPO to identify other improvements. So these are the 4 options based on your feedback are not in consideration right now. That, we go back to Secretary.
Thank you, Rada. First, I wanted to thank everyone on the local advisory group for their dedication, for attending all of our meetings, for providing all of your valuable feedback. I certainly have learned a lot from our discussions, and I believe everyone has learned a lot from each other. So, next slide, Rada. Probably one of the most important slides, which is what I'm using to direct my recommendations and the directions that I believe we should move here in this region and specifically on this project. Option C1, convert 1 express lane to general purpose lane. That means move from a 2+2 to a 3+1 from exit 23 to exit 28, as well as convert 1 express lane to a general purpose lane, 2+1 to a 3+0 from exit 28 to 36. Our estimated cost impacts, and this is a summation of previous work that you've seen, but altogether estimated at $400 million for that in total option. It's scored in the hypothetical STI scoring process at a 50 to a 55. And so just a reminder, this would be the equivalent of what would be a statewide category scoring option. For this one, 50 to a 55. I'll get to that, so I'm gonna go through all of them. Option E, purchase the contract and keep express lanes as planned. And this comes from the work Jim Taylor did for us. The range of cost options there, $392 million to $623. It's scored in this hypothetical scoring for STI at a 45 to a 50. Option F, purchase the contract and convert all express lanes to general purpose lanes. Estimated cost $540 million to $771 million, and that includes the bonus allocation dollars that would have been spent by that point. 45 to 50 in the scoring. Option H, add one general purpose lane, which is changed from a 2+1 to a 3+1. This is adding a general purpose lane as in comparison to option C1 from exit 28 to exit 36. And there's a range of options that we looked at for adding that general purpose lane across the causeway. The team will brief you the details on those later, but this is the range of costs on those options. And that particular option scored between a 70 and a 75. Option I, which is one that this team had recommended that we look at and evaluate, convert one express lane to general purpose lane between exit 23 and 28. That means, again, converting from a 2+2, 2 general purpose, 2 express, to a 3+1, and then adding a general purpose lane from exit 28 to 36, which is a 2+1 to a 3+1. So essentially in this option, you'd have a consistent 3 general purpose lanes and 1 express lane from basically where 485 is all the way to exit 36 in the north. The range of cost there is $550 million to $800 million with a score of 70 to 75. And then option J was one that you also suggested we look at, which we have, is add auxiliary lanes. That is really better connections. They're not through lanes, but better connections between these interchanges. Between exit 23 and 25, exit 25 to 28, and exit 33 to 35. Each segment was scored, but the combined score would be at $40 million a segment for $120 million total, a score of 60 to 65. This is an extremely important piece of information and one that this group had asked for, which is why we believe it's important to help us drive decisions, is because the first step in funding any option that we have to this magnitude. So I'll back up and say, if things are scoring or cost more than $50 million, the only source of revenue that I have under our statutory authority is through the Strategic Transportation Investments Law, which is what funds all of our projects, primarily in the TIP of this size. So we have to go through a scoring process for those projects to qualify. We believe, based on the feedback we've gotten, we've gotten the best subset to look at here. The key is, what did these options score? In a statewide competition over the last 2 cycles, the lowest scoring statewide competition project funded was a 73. So that would tell you, to get to success quickly, we must focus on that which scores the highest right now. Realizing, as every one of you know, that costs are estimated at the time. So we're estimating these costs to be at the time of now to when the next scoring cycle is, which will start next spring. What is the best, most competitive option that could move forward with the highest probability of success? That's why when you see moving forward, those projects that are focused on here in the STI, option I has the best probability, as well as H, but I want to point out H is really so H is embedded in I. So option H only extends capacity from exit 28 to 36, where option I, at the same score, gets it from exit 23 to exit 36.
And under option I, is the contract still in place? Because we've added lanes, right? We've converted one lane, but we still have toll lanes going the entire lane.
Great question. So the contract is in place in any of these, with the exception of option E and F. The contract is still in place. The question is, how many express lanes are in that contract, and how many GP lanes are there? Does that answer your question?
So basically, as part of the cost is termination compensation, or not termination,
revenue
impacting facility compensation.
You're exactly correct. Yes.
Mr. Secretary, just to be clear, your option J is add the auxiliary lane exit 2325. I know this is where we brought up as the committee as hardening of the shoulders. Should I take this as this would be a permanent actual lane and not necessarily hardening the shoulders that would be open 24 hours?
That's correct. So there's two options. Option G was how do we harden shoulders that would only be operational during peak hours. That doesn't require scoring because of the magnitude of the cost. Option J, though, because it is not shoulder, these are actually permanent auxiliary lanes that would operate 24 hours a day, and due to the magnitude, these would require scoring. The key is, what is the most competitive alternative that we can advance today to make improvements on this facility? To give you a good comparison, on every given scoring cycle in the statewide tier, there are about 470 projects that will compete. And then at the regional level in this region, about 170. So that'll be the competition. However, I believe, and we've seen the trend, as 73 or higher gets you a fairly good probability of being selected for award. Next slide. So yes, please.
So do we have a breakdown from these ones where we don't cancel the contract as to how much compensation we're talking about?
We have detailed breakdowns.
Because it rather begs the question then, if we're paying tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars to compensate Centra, why would we not use that to apply the contract as like a down payment?
It would have to score, that option would have to score to be eligible for those funds.
Right.
Next slide. In getting here, I can assure everyone that I have heard loud and clear, the governor has stated his preference that the state of North Carolina DOT and the Turnpike Authority would ultimately operate this facility. We've heard that from many of you here as well as members of the community. I think though, looking at this data, it would be hard to say how we could get to that point today based on the processes that we must follow under law. So my recommendations are, we will not lose sight of that desire from many of the folks in the community, but we want to advance today the things that we know will have a greater probability of success in the near future. It is apparent to me with the data that we're dealing with that particular option of buying out the contract will not be competitive now or early next year. And so we want to advance those things that we believe will address as many concerns, as many requests, and as many desires as possible now and into the future.
I bring up a bunch of detailed questions, but the legislature recently passed legislation that clarified the corridor cap, took out the word contiguous. If you recall, we had that conversation back in the spring. So now we're not only competing against other projects across the state, but we're also competing with I-77 South because that's now part of the corridor as well. So
you're ahead of me in the presentation.
All right.
Yeah, go through and circle back.
I want stream of consciousness while I think about it. I don't want to miss the opportunity.
So how do we get to, how do we make progress? How do we work together and keep making progress? What's the roadmap? How do we get there? And what's the way ahead? Next bullet. I will tell you, everyone here knows that this project isn't something that's new. I think the initial efforts, and I remember these days in 2007, the entire region was looking at how do we find ways to address our mobility concerns. Started with the fast lane study. A lot of activities have occurred. In coming back on with the department when the responsibility was passed to me, first, how do we move ahead, find advantages, address concerns, but more importantly than that, reduce the conflict And this group has changed our focus from what could have been things, last summer and early fall that today we see will not score very well and drive us to methods that we believe will have much higher chance of success moving forward. So I believe let's leverage that and move ahead. And so I'll cover what I call improve, which is improve the contract through some modifications, expand the capacity on the facility with additional capacity moving forward, leveraging the things that we can do under the strategic transportation investments law and state law, and then protect the process that we've started in exchanging information, being transparent, being collaborative, so that everyone in the region, including local governments, citizens, business communities, all the communities, have a voice in the process before the decisions are final. So I'll go into a little more detail on those options. Next slide. First is improve. How do we negotiate better terms for, and drivers is probably too simplistic. It's facility users, it's the businesses located on the facility, it's the communities around the corridor. It's all of those. It's the people that use the facility that go all the way through the state. How do we provide better terms for the facility users? And those will be three areas that we're focusing on. One are toll caps, frequent user discounts, and then also allow the medium-sized trucks to use the express lanes, which is one of the recommendations that I think both the community had that we found in the Mercator report, as well as the people here on the advisory group. I believe we can start those negotiations now, and we're going to work diligently, and hopefully by the end of this fall, in preparation into winter, in preparation for our long session, we'll have those negotiations complete. And for my next report, I think that Kurt brought up our report to the General Assembly that's required. It will include our recommendations on how to improve through modifications through negotiation to do just these things. Any questions on that slide?
Yes. When you say we,
Excuse me.
what are the names of the people who are we?
We would be the Department of Transportation and our contractor, the I-77 Mobility Partners, would be working that negotiation together.
Just two of you?
We all have a group.
How many are in the group?
Excuse me.
Too early to
Excuse me.
determine the plan by first of next year, and then hopefully an implementation plan completed by early next summer. Next option. Yep. Next option is option I. We're advancing the convert one express lane to general purpose lane, the 3+1 from exit 23 to 28, and adding one general purpose lane from exit 28 to 36. Option I, the highest scoring option that we reviewed. We believe we'll work between now and the end of next spring to advance that option in more detail, get it in the next round of prioritization, which starts next year, and have as the competitive option as we can to advance through option I. Simultaneously, next prioritization cycle, and then in all subsequent cycles, we need to develop and implement a process to continually evaluate the contract purchase. That is the option E. And I know, as all you know, that it does not score well, probably will not in this next round, but we want to develop the process because costs change over time. The impacts to the project will change over time, and we want to make sure in each subsequent round we'll have it ready with the most readily available best data to consider, so we can advance that option when it becomes feasible in the prioritization process. I've added the auxiliary lanes, exit 23 to 25, 25 to 28. That was the next higher scoring option. I don't believe it will be one that we would want to advance in the future cycles if we're already implementing option G. However, that would be one that over time could be implemented depending on what happens with the other options in the scoring. I would not want that to compete with some of the higher priority scoring options moving forward.
May I ask one question as it
Yes.
relates to option J? What happened to exit 28 to 33?
We can go back and look, but I believe that is one of those locations where it was harder to fit those in due to space constraints. But I'll make sure, y'all write that down. Make sure we review that. That's initial, and that's what we collected from the last meeting to now. So that's obviously something that can be easily reviewed and advised as we can get more data. Next slide. And then last, how do we protect, we want to really protect the process that allows everyone to participate, ensure that not only the residents here, but the facility users and all of those in the region have an opportunity to participate before decisions are final. So we will continue to be open and transparent, publishing information, responding to requests throughout all of this activity moving forward. I definitely have to make sure that everything we're doing complies with state law and is responsible and responsive. But we believe that's exactly what we're proposing, and we'll alert you at any point if we think something may not fall under things that we have authority to do or cannot physically do. We will work on multiple solutions simultaneously. That's why, as you can see, there's got to be multiple solutions working, because if anyone believes they can tell the future with perfection, you probably wouldn't be sitting here. So how can we keep advancing things with the best information that we have at the time, keeping the process open, listening to everyone, getting the best information we can, and then revising these alternatives as things in the future that we may not know become more certain in the closer term that we approach. And then last, continue to engage not only this group, but everyone in our business group, everyone in the corridor and everyone in the region really has an interest in how we advance projects here in North Carolina. And we want to make sure that we set the standard very high on how we continue to do that, because in the end, we're all successful together or we all fail together. Next slide. I've listed this as constraints. It's really reminders. Strategic Transportation Investments Law, I think I've covered that. You know, that directs things that I can and can't do, but it certainly gives us the authority on the things that we can do. So we want to maximize the things that we can do, keep the trust and confidence of the citizens, the local government, our NPOs, our RPOs in Iredell County, as well as our General Assembly members. We're going to comply with the state law in Senate Bill 99, which says that I will report. So we will report. We'll work with our General Assembly partners on our ideas for contract modifications and in the future potential for cancellation. We will do a 60-day notice, but we'll have to work through the negotiations first before we can go and report to the General Assembly what we believe we can do. That's why I believe this fall will be critical moving forward in preparation on those initial steps for our long session. And then defines impacts. The Senate Bill 99 did define the impacts of funding both in the bonus allocation and clarified the corridor cap question. And so to answer, a great point to answer Kurt's question now, the first and most important step is to find an alternative that will score and compete in STI. Then the second step will be, now that we found one, how do we manage that through the corridor cap process? So as you saw, the hypothetical score of 75, a footnote, I think I-77 South you brought up has an 89 in this current round. I-77 in Iredell County in the north is an 85. So it will be us to work with this region and how we balance all those, how we maximize the returns of all of these projects. And it may end up that we'll say, hey, part of this one may be better in the statewide and part may be better in the regional tier, but we want to maximize the return for the region, and we believe we can work with everyone here to do that. And then last is how do we continue to meet our requirements under the contract, as well as understanding that any of these longer term, more complex things will have design time permitting. We covered that extensively in our previous meetings. I think everyone knows, you know, those processes that will follow. But the most important, I don't worry about permitting time and design time until I have a funded competitive project. And so the very first step is how do we get this, the most competitive project in the next round, so it will be highly competitive to address as many of these concerns as this community has. Next slide. So in summary, it's really been a pleasure to work with each of you. You know, I know that the roadmap is not going to solve everyone's desire in one action. That this plan would be, how do we make the process of the progress that we can today and the way we can today as fast as we can today and moving forward, you know, ensuring that we're always making progress along the path and not just sitting on our hands and saying, well, if we can't, I can't give you everything that the region wants, so I won't do nothing. I believe we're going to work hard every day as a partner and see what we can do to improve this project, this contract, and not only that, transportation in this entire region with the folks here in Mecklenburg and Iredell counties. Improve, negotiate better terms, expand, work to add non-toll capacity to the corridor, and then protect the process, the generation of ideas, and the wonderful feedback that we've gotten. The team's prepared to brief you in more detail on each of these, especially with some visuals so it can help people see what these are. I would just reiterate, I've had people say, Jim, could you have done this last year? Could we have done this earlier? I believe the evidence shows that everything we're recommending moving forward that has the greatest probability of success were the recommendations that came from this group that we refined in further detail. So it's been a pleasure. I will take a few questions and then we'll move into the technical review to help clarify these options.
Please, I have a few questions, so yeah.
So, perfect time.
Well, first of all, Secretary, I know you're trying to thread a needle here, and I appreciate the efforts that y'all are doing, and we'll get there. I just, not to put you on the spot, but maybe some of the support folks, I'm confounded by how widening I-77 from Iredell North scores higher than widening I-77 through Lake Norman on a project that's already been 3/4 built. Can somebody please explain that to me?
You may have to rephrase it. I may have lost it.
I-77 north through Iredell County scored at 85. The highest
Above 36. Above 36.
Well, north of 36. How could that possibly
you score higher than widening I-77 through Lake Norman when it's already 3/4 built? And again, that's a detailed question. Maybe there's some support folks.
I think it's because our county is really important, but that may not be.
I was thinking it's the extra effort you put in that outfit this morning.
Well, that's easy. That's the effort we're going to put in our county too.
So the real question is, you know, how could the section in the north that's adding an additional lane score higher than the section that's modifying a lane that's almost built? So the short answer to that is, as all of our projects move through prioritization, they're categorized on several things. One is travel time savings, congestion, freight mobility, safety, and all the ones I'm sure you're familiar with.
Right.
So anytime you're adding new capacity, it will inherently score higher. And so it's assuming that the capacity that's under construction is already built. So modifying that is not adding as much capacity as the new capacity that would be added on an already constrained section. So if you're going from a 2+1, which is 3 lanes, to a 3+1 in the north, that's adding much more capacity, which will achieve a higher score.
How does that that doesn't address, and I thought it was handled as STI, the level of congestion, and I'm not, maybe that's the issue, is it, does the STI take into account congestion? Because if Iredell County, I don't care how much capacity, if you add a lot of capacity where it's needed less, then add a little capacity where it's badly, sorely needed.
It does, because they're, and both, no matter if it's this project, any section, all of this is measured across with our statewide travel demand model, which is geared so that each project, no matter where it is in the state, is measured, the changes or the proposals are measured based on that system, on that project, so that you're using the same system to compare whether you're in the western part of the state, in the central part of the state, in the eastern. It uses the same methodology.
Believe me, as sitting on Carpo, we realize, although our county has been starved for asphalt and concrete for a long time, that it's more critical to fix where the toll road is than to put lanes up there where we are. Someday we will need them, but it's scored because, in doing the STI, you know, Carpo, every committee that meets and gives it a push, that adds extra scoring. That adds extra scoring. And so I know one of the scores there, but that doesn't mean it makes sense.
Only at the regional and division level.
Yeah.
But that's the only place where they can add points. Yes.
Yeah, Mr. Secretary, first let me make a comment. As I look at these numbers of the 350 million to 600 million to 550 million, 800 million, I think it's important that we keep in mind when government screws up. Okay, and as you and I have talked, there's at some point where we need to go to say, I want to take money from the government screws up bucket. I think many of us who are sitting in this room talked to Bobby Lewis 3 years ago when we said this is a bad plan, and we said, tell us what is the cost of the problem to widen I-77 from 23 to 36, and the answer was probably 250 to 300 million. And now here we are doing a fraction of that at double that amount. So I think it's important for us to take a threshold going, this was a bad deal. I don't think anyone in this room is arguing it, and it's cost the government a lot of money. And so the question that I would have for you is, how do we, and maybe it's rhetorical, I'm not sure, but how do we short circuit some of these things, right? Because what I'm hearing from you, and correct me, maybe the first question is if we get into next year's scoring, when do lanes open up? I guess that's the real question. Some of these fixes you're talking about, when do they open?
So, too early to determine. If we get in, we will get into next year's scoring. If it scores successfully, it would be programmed at the earliest time would probably be in next year's scoring.
2021.
No, the earliest scoring.
Scoring next year, program in 2021.
The program in 2021, probably 2025. But then we have to deal with the point that Kurt brought up. How do you work the corridor cap? And so that you will not know the answer until we get the other projects in the scoring, see where that occurs and how we could mitigate its effect and maximize its return.
I appreciate Kurt bringing up the corridor cap and the change in legislation, but can you clarify what that means now? What do you, how is the corridor, how is a corridor defined?
Any project or group of projects along the corridor.
Right.
Between, in a division or between two.
Contiguous divisions.
Yes. So,
no, but I'm saying for purposes of the definition, there was the word any contiguous project or group of projects. It took out the word contiguous. Now, any project or group of projects.
If I can add, the change that brought with the Senate Bill 99 with respect to corridor cap reconfirms the policy the department had, how department has been looking at scoring these projects with respect to corridor cap. So it doesn't really change anything that the way department is looking at it, but it provided more clarification and confirmation of the process. And if I can go back, sorry.
I had, following back on the SDI piece, the comment you made about the consistency across the state. And the dilemma I have, and you may have done it, but haven't articulated it, is when we talk about expansion on I-77 under the existing design, there is no comparison. When you have an area that is designed not for congestion relief but for throughput, to then say, adding an additional lane as part of that formula, I think, again, with 30 seconds worth of thought, is very different than the idea of adding additional lanes, for example, in Iredell. So, I mean, there's kind of this,
Well, so
I don't see
you're
the.
getting to the point of, if I may, so, because I've had 2 minutes of thought, so.
Okay,
I'm ahead of
good.
you. And it is that, STI is this problem is, STI is a square peg for this problem, because STI
Right.
looks at building roads and how do you rank roads or widening
Right,
roads,
right.
not terminating a contract. So I think, I asked you the question before, how could it score higher? After thinking about it, I think I have my own answer, because you're spending a lot of money for stuff that's for you know, a revenue impacting compensation or termination compensation that has nothing to do with any of the stuff that's in STI.
Which just falls under the government makes mistakes column.
Well, but then it also falls into, then this is not for the folks here, but then it falls into a legislative thing, and we're back to that again. Right?
So it does do a valid comparison, so I'll give you a good example is, you know, not only is it looking at how many lanes did you have versus how many you're proposing to add, it looks at the existing volumes, the existing travel times, the existing congestion. So it factors all of those in simultaneously. It's not just, I've got this many lanes and I'm adding, that's part of the equation, but it's also how much traffic are you accommodating? How much of that is truck traffic, automobile traffic, what are the volumes, and what's the capacity of that facility as it currently is, and what will be the impact of that facility by the addition or expansion?
I get you. The dilemma you have, though, is when we talk about the congestion piece of it, the fact that this entire project is predicated on limiting additional capacity to guarantee throughput is not part of any other SDI project. So you're having to guesstimate at 20-year volumes based on how many people are allowed into the toll lanes because of times, et cetera, et cetera. So while I get kind of the physical piece of it, you can kind of produce, I don't know how you start to do the comparisons with what is designed to be flexible and constraint oriented on certain part of it. So there's not any other project I think of that adding lanes doesn't take care of congestion. In this one though, there is lanes added that will throw congestion back on it. So it seems like it's a little, it goes back to what we talked about a number of times, which is I find it very difficult to solve a problem that was designed outside of SDI under SDI. And it just seems completely unfair to say, yeah, we did this when none of this was a part of the project, but now it is. So at some point, is there a legislative fix to that?
And actually, this project on I-77 was scored and ranked based on the predecessor of SDI in a similar process. So there is somewhat of a direct comparison, but the bottom line for me is I'm gonna do everything that we can at NCDOT within our authority under the law, which includes SDI, because that's the best and most expeditious path forward for me. And I believe with your help, it'll be the best and most expeditious path forward for this region.
The last question, no, that's my last
Yes.
one. But is there an opportunity to get this out of that? Like, currently, that's what you have to operate within. Is there a legislative fix, perhaps, that would pull it out? Is that even possible?
That's the legislature's purview. So that would not be ours. You know, we comply with law.
Right.
We can't modify. The lawmaking clearly falls.
But the constraint is because of the current law. You're constrained to the current law.
I'm empowered and limited
Right.
by what's in the law.
That's, okay, pretty much stole my thunder there. This was done, to me, this was before STI. I think this was in a time, even though it may have been in a scoring process then, that scoring process tended to be more politically driven than transportation.
No, it was purely data driven at that point.
Okay, maybe so.
Yes.
I don't know who's applied the data, but anyway.
At the time that this project was programmed, it was purely in the mobility fund, which was purely data driven. This was, I believe, the second project funded. The first project was No, I'm sorry, it was the third. The first project was Bus on Shoulder, the second was Yadkin River Bridge, and the third was I-77.
Well, to me, like I said, being that it was before the current process of SDOT, this is like a huge change order, if you ask me. Yeah, this is a poorly built house that has a hell of a change order that we've got to fix. And so that's why, to me, I think STI could maybe be set aside and this be ran through the legislature, because it's a change order, not a renewing of a whole new project in itself to be scored. And so that's the avenue. Y'all do however you got to get the money, but to me, that's the avenue that this ought to go, is a change order.
That's not the Secretary's purview.
I know that.
But I would say this, and I've heard like 3 or 4 people say the same thing, and I'm in total agreement with you. That's some of the feedback I think that should come out of the group as well, to whomever that gets fed back to it. And I think we said this at the top of it, this is an exceptional situation, and it deserves exceptional treatment. I seem to remember we said that back in the spring.
So that leads to my question. First of all, thank you, Mr. Secretary, and your staff for all the work you've done. At what point does CRTPO become involved in this process, looking at option G, option I, option J? Where are they in this?
As a transportation partner, they're involved with everything that goes on in the region. So from scoring a project at the statewide level, that's all done quantitatively without either points from MPOs or RPOs. Once a project, which this one may, as we move forward, may see some benefits into looking at pieces in statewide, pieces in regional, or partnering with others. I don't want to jump ahead, but I've seen this happen before, where there's as looking at parts in the statewide, parts in the regional, you can maximize the return for the entire region. There may come a time where that looks very probable and helpful, in which case partnering with all of the members of CRTPO for points at that regional competition could be beneficial. And then when you get to the division level, which any of these options would be too large to really consider at the division level of competition, they are strong players because they get 50% of the total point of that. Half of that is CRTPO, and the other half is the division.
I'll just make a comment. Considering the interactions we've had and the or lack of service we've received this region has from CRTPO, I'll bet my house without a change order that if we are competing for funding against I-77 South versus any of the options to fix I-77 up here, we will lose.
Well, and let's be really cynical and be really honest, that we all see the writing on the wall, the amount of money that CRTPO is gearing to start throwing towards the river district. Right, and all that money, and amazingly, that will score well.
No, it didn't, luckily. We figured it would.
It will eventually.
It was so bad
It will
that
eventually.
it could. Yeah.
I mean, and that's the thing that we're dealing with, the CRTPO, obviously with the voting that we have, is a challenge for that, and that's why, again, why I think we need legislature to come in.
Well, and
not.
you can take a look at what the Senate did with Senate Bill 99, taking out the word contiguous. So now we will be competing with anything in South Charlotte for I-77. So this goes back to some of our comments early on, is extraordinary project, done in an extraordinary way. This needs to be fixed outside of the normal rules. So, and I understand that you can't, that's a political thing, but I guess me, John, and Puckett and Kurt will be spending some time involved.
Yes. We have great relations across the state with all of our transportation partners, so we'll be glad to facilitate ways to bring everyone together here and find solutions.
Thank you.
I would like to add a few things. Thank you very much for being here and all the work you've done and your staff and listening to us. And I'm glad that we all learned a lot during this process. But there's that but. And I agree with Kurt and I agree with others what they have said. And you are constrained by state law, and you are constrained by, and the General Assembly controls the money. And I'd like to remind everybody there is an election coming up.
Voters are not constrained.
That's right, voters are not constrained. And you didn't mention anything about, you know, I didn't feel any confidence that you can really negotiate with Sintra, and probably you can't, and that Sintra has the power here.
I'm positive we can have a good negotiation.
You're positive about that? Well, that's encouraging. But I do worry that you're doing the best to tell us what we want to hear, and I understand you have constraints, but, and I think this project, as Kurt said, I mean, this is a project that needs an asterisk, that we jumped up because of the situation that we're in here in this part of the biggest, you know, the engine of the state here, Mecklenburg County is. So, you know, I don't have any confidence that CRTPO is going to be, you know, receptive to this, and I very much worry about some of the other things. And I worry about how we're going to pay for this. I mean, you talked about how much things will cost, but where would that money come from? You know, we've heard about how much things cost, just like we hear about if we had a train going here and here, it would cost this, or if the city has to pay it, everybody's like, well, that's fine, but how are you going to pay for it? So, I mean, I think it's, you know, we need some, and I'm very grateful to our governor for, you know, letting this happen and listening to us. But, you know, it's time for the rubber to hit the road, and it's time for some real courage and some real spine, and then we have to look at this differently. And it's not the typical project, and it is unique, and we need to, we need our leaders, and all of us are leaders, but we need to really focus on getting this. We can't keep living year after year and waiting and waiting. I mean, my gosh, this is torture up here. It is torture. It has affected the people, it has affected their family life, it has affected their mental health, their physical health. We can't, I mean, this has got to be the one that, just like at the county, we really tried to zero in on schools that needed help more than the other ones. And this is the one that really needs help. And anything we can do to help you with that, I know everyone would help. But I'm really looking for some really courage from our governor. I see we have I'm happy that Kevin Monroe is here from the governor's office, but we really need, we need our legislators to really step up and to go out there and do what's right for the people. But thank you again. Thank you for letting me.
Mr. Secretary, I have two questions I can tie together. Why is it that you feel, you know, maybe you can generalize or tell us what you can of your relationship and your initial reactions with Sintra? And then the next question is, in lieu of these recommendations you talked about today, we are on the hook to pay them $75 million more in the next 6 years for their losses that they will incur, and which we all know that they are going to incur them because they'll make sure they incur them because of other things they can do inside the contract. So I guess the question really is if you could characterize your if you can, your relationship so far, and does this affect the $75 million at all in knowing we want to head this direction?
So first is, because I believe their interest and the users of the facility will be interested in how, you know, we can make modifications that would benefit the users of the facility, give them confidence. I believe they are looking for the same kind of options. However, as you know, it'll come at a cost. So it'll be, how do we negotiate that range of cost? When it comes to the DRAM, I believe you talked about $75 million. That is one of those options that the state committed to reduce the interest cost on the project, which would reduce our cost up front. Any use of that would not go to Sintra, it would actually go directly to their bondholders. And so it's to be determined, but we are tracking all those metrics to know once the facility is open, we will track all those metrics to know if we're getting close to triggering the use of the DRAM, we will know that very quickly.
So along those lines, switching gears just a little bit, but we're talking about contract negotiations. And fortunately, I was out of town for the final meeting that you had, and this is more for the group, but when we're talking about under the improved thing, can you maybe explain, the rationale why we would be interested in negotiating toll caps and frequent user discounts? Because my way of thinking, I don't want to spend any taxpayer money getting more people to use that toll. So I wasn't here for that. Maybe y'all could clue me on what you were thinking, and do we really want to go forward with that?
Actually, my next slide actually will provide a little bit more details, and maybe after we see some more details, we can certainly talk a little bit more if needed.
May I ask one more question about the SDI? Is there any history in the life of the now STI that a project has been moved outside the SDI?
Out or in?
Outside, I mean, we're talking about an asterisk beside this facility, and we say it's planned, it's now fallen under the SDI. Is there any history of any project that had gone through the regulated process, whether it's SDI or anything else related to NCDOT?
I will ask some of our programming experts, but none come to mind.
Okay.
One follow-up to that, and then I'll let you go. For example, the DRAM payment, has that been folded into part of the SDI cost?
That is part of the project budget, yes.
Okay, so when it's compared against others, the cost of
Yes.
the cost of not acting, we recognize there could be a cost of $75 million not to act. Okay.
Okay. So I'll go through some details of first the improved element of the plan. Secretary just talked about this mainly involves negotiating better terms for the users. This is purely focused on the users that use the facility. The first one really goes to the users that use the facility very often, people that use this frequently. So what this involves, frequent user discount, this involves typically providing some type of toll credit or some type of discount for those that use this facility often. Exactly how those credits will be applied and what is the actual discount amount and what is the time frame of this, we haven't had any of those discussions yet, so we don't have those details, but those are yet to be negotiated with the developer. But it's focused mainly to provide assistance or help for the people that use this facility the most. The second one.
So I stop there. So now go back to my question. So why are we doing this? Because when we say a discount, somebody's got to make whole on the discount, right? It's the taxpayer's going to make whole. So please explain to me, because I wasn't here for this meeting, why we're going to have not only the DRAM that we just talked about, but we're also going to subsidize toll rates for people who use it the most. Was that really a recommendation from this group?
I think it's probably less of a recommendation and more of, I termed it as the alibi option. If nothing else we could do, then that's here. So I don't think the group said remove it, but I don't think we said, hey, let's go ahead, full speed ahead and make this happen.
But we also said, I think we said we are 31 points down and we're kicking a field goal, right? And so I guess that's a valid point, Mr. Secretary, that is, if this takes us further away from where we want to be, then maybe we take this away.
I wouldn't anticipate it would take us further away, but the way I will tell you, I read the recommendation and I look at it as, how do we do what we can do to encourage the most throughput in this facility to reduce the delay of anyone that's using the facility, whether they're using the express lane or the general purpose lane, or they're using, you know, in the future, Hard and Shoulder. It's how do we do everything we can do in all of these areas to do that, which is the best service that we can provide to the citizens, the facility users, of everyone on the corridor. That's the way I would look at that recommendation.
I mean, it's a tax. If we can get a better tax from the people until we figure out a process, then let's lower the tax. So,
Well, except it's you're still paying the tax, you're just shifting it. So I mean, it's not because it's.
Yeah, if the state of North Carolina has to make up the difference, maybe that's not the best thing.
Yeah, and you're
And
subsidizing
maybe we should
you're
rethink that.
subsidizing the people who use it the most.
Right.
If Centra in their best interest would do that, so that as to, you know, build some goodwill in the community, I think that's one thing. But if the state of North Carolina is gonna have to make up the difference to do that, we might wanna have a different discussion.
My argument would be, okay, I'm gonna build Lexus lanes and give people a cap. So, and I appreciate, again, the idea of, it would perhaps add more capacity on the general purpose lane, so I get that. My dilemma is, have we anticipated how much that cost would be, and we haven't, because we haven't negotiated it yet. And if we haven't negotiated yet, that is once again another thing that has not been folded into the SDI formula. Because certainly to not do the project costs more money, which I keep going back to I don't know how you fold this project into SDI when it doesn't fit any parameters of SDI. So my guess is the cost of that, maybe, well, okay, well, if nominal, then my assumption is the benefit to it is nominal. And so maybe we just, but fair enough. But again, not to belittle the point, well, again, there are an awful lot of unknowns that we can't factor into SDI, and yet we're held hostage by SDI. Thanks.
And if I can add one more thing, I mean, you made a very good point. Once we start negotiating with the developer, maybe this is an option that both sides are interested. We don't know that yet, but at least we want to present it and get some feedback and initiate the discussions. And those discussions would hopefully help to answer some other questions that you made or Commissioner Puckett brought. Toll caps, what this would involve is this would help limit the maximum toll a user would pay to use the facility, use the I-77 corridor. And what is the initial toll cap, and how does that cap change annually is not determined yet. Again, those are subject to negotiations with the developer, but that is again one more option that we believe we can do in what, if I can say, short term, so to improve the existing contract. And allowing medium trucks, that is again one more thing that came from this group to, because right now the contract limits generally limits vehicles more than 2 axles entering the facility. What this would involve is, it will involve modifying that restriction. Exactly what type of vehicle will be allowed and what would be the, if any, the toll differential between the passenger car and these other trucks are again to be determined, but those will be part of the negotiation that will need to be made.
So may I make one point about toll caps? This was just an experience I had in Raleigh, and it makes me think of the dram and the tax and the usage. I found myself by mistake on the toll road in Raleigh at 9:30 in the morning. There were maybe 6 cars on that road. And I chuckled and thought, well, this will be an interesting exercise. Let's see what happens. Which I then, 2 weeks later, got a bill from the NCDOT for $1.23. It was 2 sheets of paper, an envelope, postage, and ink, which I'm quite sure cost close to $1.23, which I promptly wrote out of my husband's checkbook because it makes me crazy. So my concern is that kind of waste or insufficient funding, that then becomes a loss to Centra that then taps into our DRAM money. So should there be a minimum experience? If you drive from exit 28 to exit 30 and it's 50 cents, do we really expect them to send us a bill for $1.24 and we then take the loss, but you don't have to pay the bill at 50 cents?
Yeah, so Bo Memory with the Turnpike Authority. So I'm the one that
sent me the letter. Thank you, Bo.
Bo's been waiting on that check.
Yeah. I sent it.
Yeah, we're waiting for that to clear. So no, as much as you hate receiving it, we hate sending it for $1.23. But the law requires that everybody who rides the road pays and get a bill. So that's state law. We have to make sure everybody's charged. But as it comes to a toll cap, certainly, I mean, these are done in a variety of ways across the country, and I think the question is what would be interesting from this group, and I think going into potential negotiations on this, what are the type of things that you would like to see in that, and is it some type of minimum thresholds for
forgiveness threshold or something?
Yeah.
But then it still might trip into the DRAM aspect of it, which is back to another tax.
I'm not worried about Centra. I think they'll figure out how to charge us enough. I think stopping them is going to be the big thing. stop and talk.
Yes, how do you reconcile that, while on topic, the idea of a total cap with the operational requirements they have? Right, because they got a minimum operating speed of 80% close to speed limit. Well, you know, if I'm giving people a bargain, or, you know, if there's an accident,
Yes.
right, you know, you hear like, what was it, on I-66, it tolls for $50 or something like that.
That's why people do a credit. The posted toll is what you pay.
Yeah.
And then if you take 10 trips and you average them out and you're above the cap, then you get credit back above the cap. But the price signal is important, and that's the key point. It's just your total trips, if you're above an average over some period of time, you get a credit rate.
Then we'll move into the expand element of the plan. This is the option G, hardening shoulders. So what one of the feedback we got is, what can we do in short term to improve operations to facilitate travel between interchanges. So this option looks at facilitating travel between interchanges using the shoulders. Of course, this would involve hardening the outside shoulder, both directions, between exit 23 and exit 35. And some portions of the corridor, it's already hardened. Some portions of the corridor would need to be hardened. That means there will be some construction involved in implementing this. And depending on how this option is moves forward, this couldn't be implemented in phases. What I mean by that is, this could be implemented only between exit 23 and 25, or maybe 33 and 35, or this could be implemented all the way from 23 to 35 in one phase. Hardening shoulders for peak period travel is a common practice that's used across the nation. The two corridors that come into mind is 405 in the west, and Interstate 405 in Washington, and I-66 in Virginia. And on this slide, you will see a couple of pictures. This image that you see on the left of the screen is from I-66 in Virginia. This is the area where hardened shoulders have been in use since 1992, or were used since 1992, over 20-year period. And again, this is for peak period travel to accommodate that.
And to be clear, that is not a revenue impact.
We are,
As long as we restrict the time, it's not a revenue impact.
yes, because we are looking at this as improvement to accommodate the local travel between interchanges.
It's not a man, it's just not a, it is a managed.
Time managed.
But it's also, if I'm correct, per the contract, it is an integrated transit solution, so therefore not subject to compensation essentially.
It would be considered an ITS.
An ITS. So if that is not gonna, I guess my question to be, is this something that can be done like in the next year?
That's exactly my goal, is to have an implementation plan, work out all the details. I think Rhoda covered a few of the structural reviews that we have to do, and have a plan to say, okay, somewhere around early next summer, we may be able to go to contract by this date. That's the kind of time frame I'm looking at on this option.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to be clear, that's not the 2021 or 2025 as some of these other items.
No.
And to add on to that, that's what, sorry, I can go back. That's why you see potentially this can be implemented in phases, and that further helps, because you can split this into smaller pieces to implement in phases in a shorter time.
Well, I think what this community is looking for, because we have been through so much in the last 3 years, and, you know, the secretary mentioned earlier, it takes teamwork. Well, this community's been a team, and we've been working for 3 years, and we've dealt with this. And so there is a lot of interest of getting some things fixed fast to give us some relief.
Yep. And absolutely appreciate all the feedback, and I use this facility. I live here. I use I-77 pretty much every day, so I fully understand.
Sorry to hear that.
Option I, as I mentioned earlier, this is really a combination of two options. Option C1, that actually involves converting the facility from exit 23 to exit 28, going from 2 express and 2 GP lanes, or general purpose lanes, to 3+1, that is 3 GP lanes and 1 express lane. And adding a new general purpose lane north of 28, that means exit 28 to 36. And this is a segment, as you all very well, as you all are very familiar, this is a segment that goes over the causeway. That means this involves the permit, obtaining permits from FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. What any construction, I'm probably going into a little bit more technical details, but any construction that occurs that crosses what they define as the elevation lane, of 760 foot would require obtaining permits through Duke Energy, through FERC. So this construction, this option would involve that. Of course, it will involve some of the additional typical environmental permit too. So knowing the complexity of adding a lane in this segment, what we wanted to do was we just wanted to look at some potential options. So before we come today, so we know the feasibility of this and potential cost range. So image you see on the screen right now is what's actually being built right now. This is over the causeway, and oh, I'm so sorry, sir.
Okay.
These are the existing lanes, general purpose lanes, and the project is adding, doing work in the median, adding one express lane in each direction with the delineators and the median barrier wall. And you can kind of see this, the constraints here, and that shows the limitations that we would have to do any construction on this. And the next slide, what you will see is, you will see three images, three different options that we looked into it. These are not all the options. These are some example options that could be seen as potential solutions to implement the project, or to implement additional GP lane on this corridor. And finally, option J, this involves adding auxiliary lanes. And this is a new option we developed based on the feedback we obtained from the local advisory group. This is looking at different segments, exit 23 to 25, 25 to 28, 33 to 35. The idea on this is implement these auxiliary lanes where there are not already auxiliary lanes. One of the questions asked earlier was, why are we not looking at between 28 and 33? I believe there is actually auxiliary lane already between 31 and 33, so that is the reason why 31 and 33 is not in place. Between 28 and 31, we are not looking at this because that's where the causeway is. If you can actually widen the causeway, you would go ahead and do the full lane rather than auxiliary lane. That's why you're looking at outside auxiliary causeway. And again, this is between interchanges. This helps the travel between interchanges. That, I'll leave back to the secretary for any closing.
Well, this is a closing slide. I wanted to first see if there were any other questions, suggestions, comments, feedback anyone has. We're going to make sure all these materials are online. Should be like today now. Okay, will be online, so you can go and look at those, pull them down if you want more details. You know, I anticipate with the schedule that I envision, we're going to work on those initial modification options. Be prepared to have a presentation and report ready for the General Assembly by the end of this year, making sure that's ready for the long session coming up. So I will certainly make that available to this group, but that'll just solely be focused on what we believe we can do under those short-term modifications. I will really work hard to have more details on option G by January, with the idea of having that plan fully finalized by the summer. And so I'll make sure you have that by early next year, where we are with option G and how long we think it'll take before we move to actual construction. And then around January, early winter, it will probably be a really good time for us to come back with, here's more details on what we're going to advance with option J, and then how we plan on doing, and option J would be adding the additional capacity. I think one of the thoughts, or at least one of the comments that I heard was, you know, the way we had option J structured right now was adding a lane from 28 to 36 and modifying a lane from 23 to 28. In the meantime, we can also look at simply just adding a lane from 23 to 36, and actually, I don't know, but it actually may increase the score there as well. So we'll take a look at that as well. And then, in the meantime, by that time, have the plan we're gonna have for how we look at every prioritization cycle, what the cost of purchasing the contract would be, and how that looked in each of the prioritization cycles we have, the one starting next year and then every 2 years after that.
I'm smiling because you mentioned adding a lane from 23 to 36, which is what we've been asking for like 6 years. So wouldn't it be something if after the end result of that all this, that's where we end up.
Mr. Secretary, would we be able to ask, just so that we continue to move forward, that we schedule and have a meeting to this body either December, January, so that we can make sure we
We'll
kind of get a
tentatively
progress
send some
report?
dates and look toward doing that somewhere around, I think the best time would be, I can send out a report maybe before January, but January would be the good time, so I can optimize, not just report something here, something later, we'll just do it all in January, but you'll probably get an update before then. Because once we get our report ready for the General Assembly, I want to make sure everyone in the region has access to that.
And could you give us an update of the current timing of the project with delays or whatever of where they are at this point in time?
The current construction status, Deputy Chief Engineer right here.
Currently, they're scheduled to be open the end of this year, December. So if weather holds, we think they could be reasonably close to that.
Is that the entire length of the project, or is that just on the north side here?
That's the entire length.
With the exception.
With the exception of direct connects.
I'd just like to thank the state of North Carolina, and the Department of Transportation, and Secretary Trogdon for listening to us. I feel like there's been a cry from the wilderness, and you've heard us. And I appreciate that. A lot of times, government seems to have a deaf ear. But this time, I think they strained really hard, and they heard what we had to say. And I want to thank this panel, all the people on it, because I know there was a lot of people rolling in boats to try to get this done. I'm not using that as a lake effect either. But also, I'd like to thank the constituents in this impacted area, because we've all been through trials and tribulations with this project. And I feel like now, I said at one time that I felt trapped. I feel like I see some light at the end of the tunnel. And I think we're gonna move forward. And I appreciate this so much, because I think to me in Iowa County, it's gonna open up a whole new world for us as far as being able to move transportation and trucking and freight back and forth, not to mention people. So thank you so much for this.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead, I'll wrap.
Okay. With all due respect to my friend and colleague, let me go back and say I appreciate everything we've done, everybody in this room, and particularly NCDOT. And I think that what you've presented is yeoman's work and an excellent solution under the constraints we have. And I give you great credit for that. I know we've talked a lot about it, and talked about what would work, what wouldn't work, what to consider, what not to consider. But I would be remiss if I said that I think this is the answer. Because I think you and we are continuing to work through a problem that we did not create. And we're having to work with it with unfair advantages. So as we continue to go through this, I'm going to beg both parties, both legislature, the governor's office, to try and begin to understand the economic impact of this disaster, because I do not think it gives us what we need with logistics. I spent this morning with a good customer of mine who's in the logistics business. He's a rigger. He's the person who puts manufacturing machinery in manufacturing plants, and I work with him. And he said he refuses to be on I-77, and the need for him to be on I-77 is dwindling every day because nobody's looking to build anything here. So while we go forward, I at least am committed, and I hope others will be committed, to trying to find some logical solution to this outside of SDI that allows the legislature and the governor and the people of North Carolina and of this region to find a way to get there quicker and within a more logical method of getting out of this. I just think it's like we wandered into a maze and we refused to say, you know what, maybe the best thing to do is just cut through the maze and get to the outside and deal with what we had. So I applaud us for getting this far. I applaud you for working on what you're doing, but I will be sorely disappointed if we're not working a parallel path to try and do something entirely different that says we made a mistake, we've got to find a way to fix it, recognize the economic upside to that, the political upside and or downside, and maybe come to another conclusion outside of the constraints. That's
And in the meantime, we'll exhaust every option that we have.
And I would want you to continue to do that, and I think you're doing a masterful job of that.
I just want to take a closing remarks that as the representative for the Chamber of Commerce here in Lake Norman, I want to thank, we've enjoyed hosting this facility. I want to thank Bill for all his hard work. I would like to also, if I may, say that we're going to be hosting a business briefing, the I-77 business plan, who is holding together a community. We'll be hosting a business briefing next Wednesday, August 22nd at 7 o'clock. That will be at Comfort Suites at Lake Norman in Huntersville, 14510 Boulder Drive in Huntersville. And again, you've heard a lot of us, we're quiet, we tried to ask pointed questions, but there's a lot to unpack here, and we will continue to work to get answers, and hopefully as we unpack this, we'll be able to provide the public more information next Wednesday. You can arrive at 6:45, and Jim and I will be talking, and probably Kurt, and then Bill will be there as well, and most of the people from the I-77 business plan. So with that, I'm going to let you close. Mr. Secretary.
Well,
thank you.
Again, thanks for all your participation, and we look forward to keep working hard, making progress in every alternative we consider and every action we take. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.